I watched from my kitchen window as three strangers loaded my grandfather's vintage John Deere tractor onto a flatbed truck, and my blood turned to ice when I realized they were wearing official vests with the Pinewood Springs HOA logo emblazoned across the back. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and I had moved into my grandfather's house in Pinewood Springs, Colorado, just 6 months earlier after he passed away from a heart attack at 83. The old man had been a fixture in this mountain community for 40 years, long before it became the cookie-cutter subdivision nightmare it was today. His property sat on 5 acres at the edge of the development, grandfathered in from when this whole area was just farmland and forest. The house was modest, but the land was gorgeous, with towering pines and a clear view of the front range. I bolted out the front door in my slippers, not even bothering with a coat despite the November chill. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" A woman in her mid-40s with an asymmetrical blonde haircut and designer sunglasses turned to face me. She held a clipboard like a weapon and wore a smugness that could have powered the entire subdivision. "Mr. O'Brien, I presume? I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Pinewood Springs HOA. We've sent you 3 certified letters regarding this matter." "What letters? What matter? That's my grandfather's tractor." Patricia pursed her lips into what I assumed was her version of a patient smile. "According to HOA bylaws section 12, subsection 4, all equipment visible from the street must be stored appropriately or will be claimed for community use. Your grandfather's tractor has been sitting uncovered in your side yard for 6 months. It's my property, on my land." "Actually," she said, adjusting her oversized sunglasses even though clouds covered the sun, "the HOA covenant states that any equipment left in visible disrepair becomes community property after 90 days of notification. We sent letters in August, September, and October. Since you failed to respond or comply, the equipment now belongs to the HOA for community purposes." One of the workers, a younger guy who looked deeply uncomfortable, paused in securing the tractor. "Madam, are you sure about this?" "This seems kind of— the bylaws are clear, Brandon," Patricia snapped. "Continue loading." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "Sheriff Davidson is well aware of HOA regulations. In fact, he approved this reclamation yesterday. We need this tractor for snow removal operations this winter." The community voted, and the decision was unanimous among board members. "I'm part of this community. Nobody asked me. You failed to attend the last 4 HOA meetings, Mr. O'Brien. Attendance is mandatory per your residency agreement. Your grandfather had a special exemption due to his age and founding status, but that exemption died with him. You're subject to all standard bylaws." My head spun. I had been so focused on settling Grandpa's estate, dealing with the grief, and adjusting to working remotely from his house that I had ignored the flood of HOA correspondence. Most of it looked like junk mail newsletters about approved fence colors and reminders about trash can placement. I had no idea they could just take someone's property. "This is theft," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This is community governance," Patricia corrected. "You'll receive a formal receipt of the transaction. The tractor will be stored in the community equipment shed and utilized for snow plowing on all HOA-maintained roads. You should be thanking us, actually. Your property values are protected when eyesores are removed. That tractor is a 1974 John Deere 4030. It's worth $15,000 minimum. It was my grandfather's pride and joy." "Then you should have taken better care of it," Patricia said. "According to our assessment, it's worth maybe $5,000 in its current condition. you'll receive a tax receipt for donation to the HOA. Donation. I'm not donating anything. The flatbed truck rumbled to life, my grandfather's green tractor now secured with chains. I felt physically ill watching it roll down the driveway. That machine had plowed this land for decades. Grandpa had taught me to drive it when I was 12 during summer visits. He had maintained it meticulously, but after he died, I had left it sitting because I wasn't sure what to do with it. The engine still ran perfectly, though the paint had faded and one tire was low. Patricia handed me a folder. All the documentation is here. Have a wonderful day, Mr. O'Brien. And please remember, HOA meetings are the first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. sharp. Your presence is required or you'll face additional fines. She climbed into her white Lexus SUV and drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway holding a folder full of legal jargon and feeling like I had just been mugged in broad daylight. I called the Summit County Sheriff's Office, and after being transferred 3 times, I finally got a deputy on the line. Deputy Williams sounded tired and uninterested. Sir, if the HOA followed proper notification procedures and you failed to respond within the designated time frame, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You need to take it up with a lawyer. So they can just steal my property. Did they follow the bylaws you agreed to when you moved in? I inherited the property. I didn't agree to anything. The HOA covenant runs with the land, sir. When you inherited the property, you inherited the obligations. If you want to dispute this, you need to hire an attorney and file a civil suit. That's all I can tell you. I hung up and immediately called my sister, Monica, who lived in Denver. She was a paralegal and the smartest person I knew when it came to legal matters. Kevin, slow down, she said after I had ranted for 5 straight minutes. They actually took Grandpa's tractor. Just drove away with it, said it's for community snow removal now. Okay, this is insane, but HOAs have enormous power in Colorado. Do you have copies of those letters they claim they sent? I never saw any letters. Check Grandpa's mail pile. Check everything. If they can't prove proper service, you might have a case. But Kevin, I have to be honest with you. HOA bylaws are legally binding contracts. If they followed the letter of the law, even if it's morally wrong, you might be screwed. So what do? Document everything. Take photos of where the tractor was. Save all correspondence and find a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. But that's going to cost you easily $5,000 to $10,000 just to start. I spent the rest of the day tearing through every piece of mail in Grandpa's house. In a pile of catalogs and coupon mailers on his desk, I found them. 3 certified letters from the Pinewood Springs HOA, unopened. They had been mixed in with subscription renewal notices and Medicare spam. The envelopes looked official but not urgent. I had assumed they were just more HOA nonsense about paint colors or landscaping requirements. I opened them now, hands shaking. The first letter, dated August 15th, notified me that the John Deere tractor in my side yard was in violation of community standards and must be moved to an enclosed structure within 30 days. The second letter, dated September 16th, stated that I had failed to comply and had 30 more days to rectify the situation or face property reclamation. The third letter, dated October 18th, informed me that the HOA board had voted to claim the tractor as community property and would be collecting it on November 21st. Today was November 21st. I had been properly notified. I had simply ignored it, thinking it was more HOA busybody nonsense. And now my grandfather's tractor was gone. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Grandpa, about how he had fought with the HOA for years over various issues. He had told me stories about their attempts to make him pave his gravel driveway, to trim his trees to match neighborhood aesthetics, to remove his vegetable garden because it wasn't decorative enough. He had won most of those battles because his property predated the HOA and he had negotiated exemptions. But apparently, those exemptions hadn't transferred to me. The next morning, I drove to the HOA Community Center, a modern building near the subdivision entrance that looked more like a corporate office than a neighborhood clubhouse. The parking lot was mostly empty except for Patricia's white Lexus and a few other vehicles. Inside, a receptionist who looked fresh out of college greeted me with a practiced smile. "Can I help you? I need to speak with Patricia Whitmore. You have an appointment." "No, but she stole my property yesterday, so I think she can spare 5 minutes." The receptionist's smile faltered. She picked up her phone and had a whispered conversation. After a moment, she hung up. "Miss Whitmore says she'll see you, but she only has 10 minutes before her next meeting." Patricia's office was decorated like a suburban command center. Framed photos of the neighborhood lined the walls, along with certificates of HOA achievement and a large map of Pinewood Springs with different colored pins marking various locations. She sat behind a glass desk, typing on a laptop. "Mr. O'Brien," she said without looking up. "What can I do for you? I want my grandfather's tractor back." "That's no longer possible. The tractor is community property now." I found the letters. I admit I missed them in the mail, but this is an insane overreach. That tractor has enormous sentimental value. Patricia finally looked at me, her expression somewhere between boredom and annoyance. "Mr. O'Brien, I understand you're upset, but the HOA exists to maintain property values and community standards. Your grandfather was a wonderful man, but he also fought us at every turn, and frankly, his property always looked unkempt. Old equipment, overgrown landscaping, that gravel driveway. Now that you own it, we expect better compliance. The property is 5 acres. It's supposed to look natural." "It's supposed to look maintained," Patricia corrected. "We have standards here. Everyone pays HOA fees, everyone follows the rules. No exceptions. My grandfather had exceptions." "Your grandfather negotiated those decades ago when this HOA was first formed. Those were personal agreements that didn't transfer. You're a new owner, which means you follow current bylaws. If you had attended even one meeting, you would know this." I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. What would it take to get the tractor back? Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "It's not for sale. We need it for community snow removal. We've already hired someone to operate it, and the first significant snow is forecast for next week. However, if you want to make your property compliant, I suggest you start by paving that driveway, trimming those trees to match neighborhood sight lines, and removing that old chicken coop structure in your back acre. The HOA has been very patient, but your grace period is over." "Patient? I've been here 6 months. And in those 6 months, you've received 17 violation notices. Your trash cans are visible from the street every week. Your grass was too long in September. You have unauthorized wildflowers in your front yard. Your mailbox is rusty. Your house numbers are the wrong font. Shall I continue?" My jaw dropped. "Wildflowers. Those are actual wildflowers. This is Colorado, and Grandpa's mailbox has been there for 40 years. And it needs to be replaced with an HOA-approved model. All of this is in your welcome packet." "I never got a welcome packet." Patricia sighed and pulled a folder from her desk drawer. "This is a copy of the packet left on your doorstep the week you moved in. It includes all community guidelines, bylaws, and architectural standards." Failure to review these materials doesn't exempt you from compliance. I stared at the thick folder. I vaguely remembered finding something like that on the porch back in May and tossing it on a table, meaning to look at it later. I had been drowning in estate paperwork and grief. An HOA welcome packet had been the last thing on my mind. "This is insane," I muttered. "This is community living," Patricia said. "If you don't like it, you're welcome to sell and move somewhere without an HOA. Otherwise, I suggest you start complying. Your next violation will result in daily fines of $50 until corrected." I left the HOA office feeling like I had just been hit by a truck. This whole situation was surreal. I had moved to Colorado for peace and quiet, to work remotely in the mountains, to honor my grandfather's memory by living on his land. Instead, I was being terrorized by a power-hungry HOA president over wildflowers and trash cans. That afternoon, I called every HOA attorney in the Denver area. Most were too busy or too expensive. One lawyer named David Chen agreed to a phone consultation for $200. After I explained the situation, he let out a low whistle. "Mr. O'Brien, I'm going to be straight with you. HOAs in Colorado have extensive legal authority. If they followed proper notification procedures, and you failed to respond within the designated time frame, and if the bylaws explicitly state that non-compliant equipment becomes community property, they're within their rights. It's harsh, but it's legal. So I have no recourse. You could file a civil suit arguing the penalty is disproportionate to the violation, but that would cost you at least $15,000 in legal fees with no guarantee of success. You could also attend HOA meetings and push for a bylaw change, but that requires majority board approval. Honestly, your best bet is to comply with their demands, stay under the radar, and decide if you want to continue living there. My grandfather's property shouldn't be subject to this nonsense. Unfortunately, when the HOA was formed and your grandfather agreed to join, even with his negotiated exemptions, he bound the property to HOA authority. Those exemptions were personal to him, not the land. I'm sorry, but you're in a tough spot. After I hung up, I sat in Grandpa's old recliner and stared at the wall. The house smelled like pine and old books, exactly how I remembered from childhood visits. Grandpa had been a tough old farmer who had built this life with his bare hands. He had bought this land in 1985 when it was just forest and field. He had built the house himself, along with the barn and the chicken coop. He had planted the trees, dug the pond, established the garden. And now some suburban HOA was telling me it all had to conform to their aesthetic standards. I thought about what Grandpa would do in this situation. He had always been a fighter, but he had also been strategic. He didn't rush into battles he couldn't win. He planned, he prepared, and then he struck decisively. Over the next few days, I dove into research. I read every word of the HOA bylaws, all 93 pages. I learned that Pinewood Springs HOA had been established in 1986 when a developer purchased the surrounding land and built the subdivision. Grandpa had been pressured to join to avoid being landlocked, and he had negotiated his exemptions as a condition of membership. The current board consisted of 5 members, with Patricia as president. Meetings required a quorum of 3 members, and bylaw changes needed a 2/3 vote. I also discovered something interesting buried in the bylaws. Section 27 dealt with community equipment and stated that any equipment claimed by the HOA had to be utilized for community purposes within 30 days of acquisition, or it would be returned to the original owner. If the HOA took my tractor and didn't actually use it for snow removal, I could reclaim it. The forecast showed snow arriving in 5 days, but after that, The extended outlook was dry for at least 3 weeks. If Patricia was bluffing about using the tractor, I might have a window. I attended the next HOA meeting on Tuesday, December 5th. The community center meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. About 20 homeowners were scattered throughout the room, most looking bored or irritated. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members, 2 men in their 50s and 2 women in their 40s. Everyone looked like they had walked out of a real estate magazine. Patricia called the meeting to order with a gavel tap. Welcome, everyone. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's begin with community updates. First, I'm pleased to announce we've acquired a tractor for snow removal operations. This will save the HOA approximately $12,000 in contractor fees this winter. A few people clapped. Most just stared at their phones. Second, Patricia continued, we've identified several properties with ongoing violations. Notices have been sent and we expect immediate compliance. Remember, we all signed the covenant. We all agreed to maintain standards. I raised my hand. Patricia's eyes landed on me with all the warmth of a glacier. Yes, Mr. O'Brien. I'd like to discuss the tractor acquisition. That was my property taken without proper compensation. We've been through this, Mr. O'Brien. Proper notification was provided. The matter is closed. The bylaws state that claimed equipment must be utilized within 30 days or returned. I'd like confirmation that the tractor will actually be used. A murmur rippled through the room. Patricia's jaw tightened. Of course it will be used. We have a contractor ready to operate it. Who? That's not relevant to, I think it's very relevant, I interrupted. You claimed my property for community purposes. The community deserves to know the plan. One of the board members, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit, leaned forward. Miss Whitmore, perhaps we should address this more thoroughly. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. Fine. We've contracted with Jensen Snow Services to operate the tractor as needed throughout the winter. The contract is standard and approved. Can I see the contract? I asked. That's proprietary information. It's community equipment now, funded by community fees. I think we have a right to see it. More murmuring from the crowd. I was getting some nods. Patricia looked like she wanted to throw her gavel at my head. This is highly irregular, she said. We'll provide a summary at the next meeting. The bylaws say claimed equipment must be utilized within 30 days. It's been 14 days. If you don't use it in the next 16 days, I have the right to reclaim it. Patricia's face flushed red. Are you threatening this board? I'm citing the bylaws you claim to follow so religiously. The meeting deteriorated from there. Patricia rushed through the rest of the agenda, ignored several questions, and adjourned 20 minutes early. As people filed out, a few homeowners approached me. An older woman named Dorothy, who lived 3 streets over, shook my head. Good for you, standing up to her. Patricia has been a tyrant since she took over. My husband and I got fined $500 because our front door was the wrong shade of red. A younger couple, Sarah and Tom, nodded in agreement. We got hit with $800 in fines because we planted roses that were too tall, Sarah said. The bylaws say flowers can't exceed 18 inches. Who measures flowers? I learned that Patricia had been HOA president for 3 years and had steadily increased her enforcement efforts. What had once been a relatively relaxed community organization had become an authoritarian nightmare. People were afraid to decorate for holidays or plant gardens. Several longtime residents had sold and moved away rather than deal with the constant harassment. Why don't you vote her out? I asked. Tom laughed bitterly. We've tried. She controls the board. The other members are either her friends or too intimidated to oppose her. And the voting process is rigged. Board members appoint their own successors unless 50% of homeowners show up to vote otherwise. Turnout is usually around 20%. I drove home that night with my mind racing. This wasn't just about my tractor anymore. This was about an entire community being held hostage by a petty dictator. And I was starting to form a plan. The snow arrived on schedule, dumping 8 inches on Pinewood Springs overnight. I woke up to a winter wonderland and immediately checked on the tractor situation. According to the community Facebook page, the HOA had hired Jensen Snow Services to plow the roads, but they were using their own equipment, not my grandfather's tractor. I drove to the community equipment shed, a large metal building near the maintenance yard. Through the window, I could see the John Deere sitting unused, gathering dust. My blood boiled. Over the next 2 weeks. 3 more snowstorms hit. Each time, Jensen Snow Services plowed with their trucks. The tractor never moved. I documented everything with photos and timestamps. I also started attending every HOA event, reading every bylaw, and talking to every frustrated homeowner I could find. On December 28th, exactly 30 days after the tractor was taken, I showed up at the HOA office with my documentation and a formal letter demanding return of my property. The receptionist looked nervous. "Miss Whitmore is in a meeting. I'll wait." 2 hours later, Patricia emerged from her office looking harried. When she saw me, she actually groaned. "Mr. O'Brien." "What now?" I handed her the letter. "It's been 30 days. The tractor hasn't been used for community purposes. Per Section 27 of the bylaws, I'm reclaiming my property." Patricia scanned the letter, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We have used it." "No, you haven't. I have photographic evidence that it hasn't moved from the equipment shed." "Jensen Snow Services has been plowing with their own equipment. You took my tractor under false pretenses. We've had it serviced and prepared for use. That counts as utilization." "That's not what the bylaw says. It says utilized for community purposes. Sitting in a shed isn't utilization." Patricia's professional mask slipped, revealing raw anger underneath. "You're really going to be this petty? Me? You stole my grandfather's tractor." I followed the bylaws. "And now I'm following them too. Return my tractor, or I'll file a complaint with the county and a civil suit." We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Patricia said, "Fine. You can have your tractor back, but don't think this is over. Your property still has 17 open violations. That's $850 in fines. I'll see you in court over those too." I arranged for a flatbed truck to pick up the tractor the next day. When it was finally back on my property, sitting exactly where it had been before, I felt a surge of victory. But I also knew Patricia was right. This wasn't over. January brought more snow and more HOA harassment. I received daily violation notices. My trash cans were out 12 minutes past the allowed time. My driveway had snow accumulation exceeding 4 inches. My holiday lights stayed up 3 days past the allowed date. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I disputed every single one through the official HOA appeals process, which meant written letters, documented evidence, and formal hearings. It was exhausting and time-consuming, but I refused to back down. I also continued attending HOA meetings and building alliances with other frustrated homeowners. In February, Dorothy's husband Frank had a heart attack. It was minor, and he recovered, but during his hospital stay, the HOA fined them $600 for not shoveling their driveway within the required 24-hour window after a snowstorm. Dorothy called me in tears. "We're both 72 years old," she sobbed. "Frank was in the hospital. I didn't even think about the driveway. And now they want $600. I showed up at Dorothy and Frank's house the next morning with a shovel and spent 3 hours clearing their driveway, sidewalk, and front path. When I was done, I took photos and helped Dorothy file an appeal. We argued medical emergency exemption, which was buried in the bylaws but technically valid. Patricia denied the appeal anyway. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and go on offense. I spent the next 3 weeks doing deep research into HOA law, Patricia's tenure as president, and the community finances. What I discovered was explosive. The HOA had over $200,000 in reserve funds that were supposed to be used for community improvements. But in the 3 years since Patricia took over, almost nothing had been spent on actual improvements. The roads had potholes. The community center needed a new roof. The playground equipment was outdated and borderline unsafe. Meanwhile, the HOA had spent $18,000 on consulting fees paid to a company called Whitmore Consulting LLC. It took me less than an hour to discover that Whitmore Consulting was owned by Patricia's husband, Derek. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent copies to every homeowner in Pinewood Springs. I also sent a copy to the Colorado HOA Regulatory Board and the Summit County District Attorney's Office. The response was immediate and dramatic. My phone rang off the hook with calls from angry homeowners. The community Facebook page exploded with outrage. Someone created a petition to recall the entire HOA board that got 200 signatures in 48 hours. Patricia called me directly, which was a first. Her voice shook with barely controlled fury. "You have no idea what you've done." "I exposed corruption," I said calmly. "Your husband has been receiving HOA funds for fake consulting work. That's embezzlement. Those were legitimate consulting services." Derek provided strategic planning and management advice. Derek sells insurance in Denver. He has no HOA management experience. And even if the consulting was legitimate, Colorado law requires HOA expenditures over $5,000 to be approved by membership vote. You never put it to a vote. "You're going to regret this, O'Brien." "Is that a threat?" She hung up. 3 days later, I received a certified letter informing me that my HOA membership was being terminated and my property was being subjected to a forced sale under the bylaws. According to the letter, I had accumulated over $12,000 in unpaid fines and had failed to bring my property into compliance despite repeated warnings. The HOA was exercising its right to foreclose on the lien and auction my property to recover the debt. I immediately called David Chen, the HOA attorney. This time I was willing to pay whatever it cost. "They can't do this," David said after reviewing the letter. "They can place a lien for unpaid fines, but they can't force a sale without a court order, and you'd have multiple opportunities to contest it. This is a scare tactic." "It's working," I admitted. "I'm scared." "Don't be. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to file an injunction blocking any foreclosure action. We're also going to file a formal complaint with the state HOA board regarding the financial irregularities. And we're going to organize the homeowners to call an emergency meeting and vote the board out. Can we do that?" According to the bylaws, 25% of homeowners can petition for an emergency meeting. You have 200 signatures on that recall petition. How many total homeowners are there? 412. Perfect. That's almost 50%. Let's do this. The next month was a whirlwind. David filed all the necessary legal paperwork. I organized town halls in my living room where frustrated homeowners shared their stories. Dorothy and Frank became my biggest allies, spreading the word to their neighbors. Sarah and Tom created a website documenting every HOA abuse. A local news station picked up the story and ran a segment called HOA Horror Stories, featuring Pinewood Springs. Patricia fought back hard. She sent letters threatening lawsuits for defamation. She called the sheriff claiming I was harassing her. She tried to hold an emergency board meeting to change the bylaws regarding recall procedures, but we showed up with 80 homeowners and shut it down through sheer numbers. The breaking point came in March when the district attorney's office announced they were opening a formal investigation into HOA financial irregularities. The day after that announcement, Patricia resigned as HOA president, and her husband Derek returned $18,000 to the HOA account, claiming it was a good faith gesture to avoid misunderstanding. The emergency election was held on March 15th in the high school gymnasium because the community center wasn't big enough. Over 300 homeowners showed up, the largest HOA turnout in Pinewood Springs history. The entire board was voted out and replaced with new members, including Dorothy, Tom, and a retired accountant named Richard who promised financial transparency. I declined to run for the board. I had no interest in HOA politics. I just wanted to live in peace on my grandfather's land. The new board's first action was to review and eliminate excessive bylaws. Trash and visibility rules were removed. Wildflowers were explicitly allowed. Grass height requirements were relaxed. Mailbox standards were simplified. The new bylaws still maintained reasonable community standards, but they focused on genuine safety and property maintenance rather than aesthetic tyranny. The new board's second action was to void all pending fines issued under the previous board, including my $12,000. Over $200,000 in fines across the community were wiped away. But the story doesn't end there. In April, the snow started melting, and I began thinking about the upcoming season. My grandfather's land needed work. The garden had to be prepared for planting. The trees needed trimming. The driveway needed grading. And most importantly, I needed to honor Grandpa's legacy properly. I had an idea, but it was ambitious. I called my sister Monica in Denver. How much of Grandpa's estate money is left? About $80,000 after taxes and expenses. Why? I need to buy equipment. A lot of equipment. Kevin, what are you planning? Grandpa used to help all the old-timers in the area with their land. Plowing, tilling, hauling, whatever they needed. He had the equipment and the know-how. I want to continue that tradition, but bigger. You're going to start a landscaping business. Not a business. A service, free for elderly residents and people in need. But I need better equipment than just the old John Deere. Monica was quiet for a moment. Grandpa would love that. Do it. I spent the next month researching and shopping. I bought a modern John Deere 6155R tractor with a front loader and backhoe. I bought a commercial-grade zero-turn mower. I bought a utility trailer, a wood chipper, and a whole array of attachments. The total cost was $73,000, nearly wiping out the estate account. When everything was delivered to my property in early May, Patricia happened to be driving past. I was standing in my driveway next to the massive new tractor when her white Lexus slowed to a stop. She rolled down her window, staring at the equipment. "That's quite a setup," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It is," I agreed. "I'm going to continue my grandfather's work helping people in the community. Free land maintenance for elderly and disabled residents. I figured if you guys wanted a tractor so badly, I'd make sure there was a really good one available." Patricia's face twitched. "That's very noble of you. It's what Grandpa would have wanted." She drove off without another word. The new HOA board had also decided to invest in proper snow removal equipment for the coming winter, which meant they no longer needed to borrow anyone's personal property. They purchased a used plow truck and hired a proper service with insurance and contracts. My new operation, which I named Murphy's Land Services after my grandfather Murphy O'Brien, launched in June. Word spread quickly through the community. I helped Frank and Dorothy with their garden beds. I cleared fallen trees for an elderly widow named Helen. I graded driveways for 3 disabled veterans. I hauled junk for a single mother struggling to maintain her property. People offered to pay me, but I always refused. This is community service, I'd say. My grandfather helped people for 40 years. I'm just continuing the tradition. The local newspaper ran a feature story. The HOA newsletter highlighted my work. Even Patricia, from her new position as a regular homeowner with no board authority, grudgingly admitted that it was a positive addition to the neighborhood. But the real moment of vindication came in November, 1 year after Patricia had stolen my grandfather's tractor. A massive snowstorm was forecast, potentially dropping 2 feet of snow on Pinewood Springs. The HOA's contracted snow service could handle the main roads, but many of the older residents had long driveways and limited mobility. I knew they'd be trapped if someone didn't help. 2 days before the storm, I organized a volunteer crew of 20 people. We mapped out every elderly and disabled resident in the neighborhood. We created a response plan with assigned zones and backup protocols, and when the snow hit, we were ready. The storm dumped 26 inches over 36 hours. It was one of the biggest November snowstorms in Colorado history. And while the main roads were handled by the HOA service, my volunteer crew and I spent 2 days clearing driveways, walkways, and access paths for 73 homes. I drove my massive new tractor through the neighborhood like a snow-eating beast, clearing paths that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Behind me, volunteers shoveled walkways and checked on residents. We delivered supplies to people who couldn't leave their homes. We made sure everyone was warm and safe. On the second day, I was clearing Dorothy and Frank's driveway when I noticed Patricia watching from her window across the street. She came outside, wrapped in an expensive parka. "That's impressive work," she said, gesturing to the cleared driveway. "Thanks," I replied, not shutting off the tractor. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said, the words clearly difficult for her. "I was wrong about your grandfather's tractor. I was wrong about a lot of things. I thought strict enforcement would maintain property values, but all it did was make people miserable. What you're doing here, this is what community actually means." I studied her face. She looked tired and older than she had a year ago. The investigation had cleared her of criminal charges, but found significant mismanagement. Her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed. She and Derek were planning to move to Arizona. "Apology accepted," I said. "But you hurt a lot of people. It's going to take time for this community to heal." "I know," Patricia said quietly. "For what it's worth, your grandfather would be proud of you." She went back inside and I finished clearing the driveway. The storm cleanup took a week, but when it was done, every vulnerable resident in Pinewood Springs had been taken care of. The HOA board sent me a formal thank you letter. The community threw a potluck dinner in my honor at the community center. Over 200 people showed up. Standing in that room, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I finally felt like I understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach me all those years ago. Community isn't about rules and enforcement. It's about people taking care of each other. It's about showing up when someone needs help. It's about building something together that's bigger than any individual. Dorothy raised her glass of punch and made a toast. To Kevin O'Brien, who fought the HOA and won, but more importantly, who reminded us what it means to be neighbors. Everyone cheered, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. After the dinner, I drove home through the snow-covered streets in my truck, the big tractor already parked safely in the barn I had built. The house was warm and welcoming. I had turned Grandpa's place into a real home over the past year, updating some things but keeping the character that made it special. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in Grandpa's old recliner, looking at the photos on the wall. There was one of him on his John Deere from the 1980s, grinning at the camera with the mountains behind him. He looked so alive and happy. "I got the tractor back, Grandpa," I said to the photo. "And then I got an even bigger one, just like you would have done." I imagined I could hear his laugh, rough and warm. The next morning I woke to sunshine sparkling on snow. The view from my window was absolutely stunning, the kind of Colorado beauty that made you grateful to be alive. I made coffee and checked my phone. There were 3 new messages from neighbors asking if I could help with various projects once the snow melted. I replied to each one, "Absolutely. Happy to help." My email had a message from David Chen, the attorney. The DA's investigation had concluded with Derek Whitmore paying a $15,000 fine for misappropriation of HOA funds. No criminal charges would be filed due to the money being returned and cooperation with the investigation. Patricia had been banned from holding any HOA board position in Colorado for 5 years. Justice served, I thought. But the best message was from Monica. She had attached photos of her twin daughters, my nieces, playing in the Denver snow. The caption read, "The girls want to come visit Uncle Kevin in the mountains. Can we come up next weekend? They want to see the famous tractor." I replied immediately, "Absolutely. I'll teach them to drive it just like Grandpa taught me." That weekend was perfect. Monica and the girls arrived Friday evening, and we spent the weekend playing in the snow, cooking big meals and telling stories about Grandpa. On Saturday afternoon, I bundled up my nieces, Emma and Olivia, and took them out to the barn. "This," I said, gesturing to the big John Deere, "was your great-grandfather's dream. He believed in helping people and taking care of the land, and now we get to continue that." 8-year-old Emma stared up at the massive tractor with wide eyes. "It's so big." "It has to be big to do big work," I explained. "Want to sit in the driver's seat?" Both girls shrieked with excitement. I lifted them up one at a time, letting them grip the steering wheel and pretend to drive. They were too young to actually operate it, but they could feel the weight and power of the machine. They could imagine the possibilities. "When you're older," I told them, "I'll teach you to drive it for real, and maybe someday you'll use it to help people too." Olivia, always the thoughtful one, asked, "Did the mean HOA lady ever say she was sorry?" "She did," I confirmed. "And she moved away. But the new HOA is much better. They actually care about people." "Good," Emma declared, "because stealing tractors is wrong." "It certainly is," I agreed, fighting back a smile. That evening, after the girls were asleep in the guest room and Monica and I sat by the fireplace with wine, my sister said, "You've really built something special here, Kevin. Grandpa would be so proud." I hope so. There were times this year when I wanted to give up, sell the place, move somewhere easier, but that would have meant Patricia won. "It's not about winning or losing," Monica said. "It's about doing the right thing." That sounds like something Grandpa would say. I learned from the best. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, the Colorado night was clear and cold, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. The land was peaceful. The house was warm. The community was healing. Everything my grandfather had worked for was safe. March brought the anniversary of the new HOA board taking over. They organized a community celebration to mark the occasion and to showcase all the improvements made over the past year. The roads had been repaired. The community center had a new roof. The playground had new equipment. And most importantly, the atmosphere had completely changed. People decorated their homes without fear. Gardens bloomed with whatever flowers residents wanted. Mailboxes showed personality and character. The neighborhood felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. During the celebration, Richard, the HOA treasurer, pulled me aside. "Kevin, I wanted you to know that we've set aside $10,000 in the budget for community assistance programs. We want to support the work you're doing with Murphy's Land Services. It wouldn't be payment for you, but it would cover fuel, equipment maintenance, and supplies." I was touched. "That's incredibly generous. It's the least we can do. You reminded us what community means. We want to invest in that." The program launched in April, and suddenly I could help even more people. I expanded services to include minor home repairs, hauling for community cleanups, and emergency assistance. A group of volunteers joined me regularly, and we became a real community resource. One afternoon in May, I was bush hogging an overgrown lot for an elderly man named Walter when I noticed someone watching from the road. It was a younger woman, maybe 30, with dark hair and an uncertain expression. I shut off the tractor and walked over. "Can I help you?" "Are you Kevin O'Brien?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Jennifer. I just moved into the neighborhood last month. I heard about what you did standing up to the HOA and about your grandfather's land service. That's really amazing. Thanks. It's been a good year. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak at a community organizing conference in Denver next month. It's about grassroots activism and standing up to unjust authority. Your story is exactly what we want to highlight." I laughed. "I'm not an activist. I just wanted my grandpa's tractor back." "And in the process, you freed an entire neighborhood from tyranny. That's activism, whether you call it that or not." I thought about it. Public speaking wasn't my thing, but if sharing my story could help other people dealing with nightmare HOAs, maybe it was worth it. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll do it." The conference was an eye-opener. I met people from across Colorado who were fighting similar battles with HOAs. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. Elderly people losing homes over minor violations. Veterans facing foreclosure over American flags. Families bankrupted by frivolous fines. My presentation focused on the importance of documentation, legal strategy, and community organizing. I shared the timeline of my fight, the legal moves we made, and the grassroots campaign that ultimately succeeded. The room was packed, and people asked questions for over an hour afterward. A state legislator named Maria Rodriguez approached me after the presentation. "Mr. O'Brien, what you've described highlights serious problems with HOA governance in Colorado. Would you be willing to testify before a legislative committee? We're considering HOA reform legislation, and your experience would be valuable." "I'm just a guy who got his tractor stolen," I said. "You're a citizen who stood up for your rights and exposed corruption. That matters." "Will you help us?" I agreed, and over the next several months I became unexpectedly involved in state politics. I testified before committees. I met with legislators. I helped draft language for proposed reforms. The legislation, called the Homeowner Protection Act, included provisions for financial transparency requirements for HOA's, limits on fines and enforcement actions, due process protections, for homeowners, restrictions on foreclosure procedures, mandatory elections for board members, independent oversight of HOA finances. The bill faced fierce opposition from HOA management companies and some developer groups, but it had strong grassroots support. Homeowners from across Colorado flooded the Capitol with calls and emails. The media coverage was extensive. In August, the governor signed the Homeowner Protection Act into law. I was invited to attend the signing ceremony. Standing in the Capitol with other advocates, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had started as a fight over my grandfather's tractor had turned into meaningful reform that would protect thousands of people. Back in Pinewood Springs, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Murphy's Land Services continued to grow, now with a team of 15 regular volunteers. We helped over 200 families that year with everything from snow removal to garden preparation to emergency repairs. The old John Deere, Grandpa's original tractor, sat in a place of honor in my barn. I had restored it over the summer, repainting it in the classic green and yellow, rebuilding the engine, replacing worn parts. It ran better than it had in years. I didn't use it for heavy work anymore, but I fired it up regularly to keep it in shape. Sometimes I would just sit on it in the barn, hands on the wheel, and think about Grandpa, about his life on this land, about his quiet determination to help people, about his battles with the HOA over the years. He had laid the groundwork for everything I had accomplished. In October, the neighborhood threw a harvest festival on the community green space. There was live music, food trucks, games for kids, and a farmer's market with local produce. It was the kind of event that couldn't have happened under Patricia's regime, because it would have violated a dozen bylaws about noise, parking, and unauthorized use of common areas. But now, the HOA embraced it. They even helped organize it. I set up a booth for Murphy's Land Services with information about our programs and photos of our work. People stopped by all day to share stories and thank me. It was humbling and wonderful. Dorothy and Frank brought me a pie. "Pumpkin," Dorothy said. "Your favorite, according to your grandfather." I accepted it with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course we did," Frank said. "You saved our home, Kevin. We would have lost it under those fines. We owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "We're neighbors. We take care of each other." As the sun set over the mountains and the festival wound down, I stood with a group of neighbors watching kids play on the new playground equipment. Sarah and Tom were there with their 2 children. Dorothy and Frank held hands like newlyweds. Richard was chatting with Jennifer, the woman who had invited me to speak at the conference. "Can you believe it's been almost 2 years since the tractor incident?" Tom asked. "Feels like a lifetime ago," I replied. "Everything is so different now," Sarah said. "I actually enjoy living here. I love my neighbors. I'm not constantly stressed about violations." "That's how it should be," I said. "That's what Grandpa always believed." We stood in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold and purple. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the green space. This was community. This was home. That night, I drove back to the house and found a package on my doorstep. No return address, just my name. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. "Kevin, I'm writing from Arizona where Derek and I have relocated. I want you to know that I've spent the past year in therapy working through my issues with control and perfectionism. I realize now that my time as HOA president was driven by fear and insecurity rather than genuine care for the community. I hurt a lot of people, including you, and I'm deeply sorry. What you've built in Pinewood Springs is beautiful. It's what I should have been working toward all along. I hope you can forgive me someday. Patricia." I read the letter twice, then set it on the kitchen counter. Forgiveness wasn't instantaneous, but it was possible. People could change. Patricia had been wrong, but she was trying to make it right. I pulled out my phone and typed a brief email to the address included in the letter. Thank you for writing. Forgiveness is a process, but I appreciate your honesty. I hope you find peace. Kevin. December brought heavy snow again, and Murphy's Land Services was ready. We had refined our systems, expanded our equipment, and recruited more volunteers. When the first big storm hit, we cleared over 100 driveways in 3 days. I drove the big tractor through the neighborhood, moving snow like it was nothing, while volunteers followed up with detail work. We had it down to a science now. People would come out of their houses to thank us, offering hot chocolate and cookies on Christmas Eve. I finished clearing the last driveway on my list and headed home. The neighborhood was magical, covered in fresh snow and decorated with lights. Unlike Patricia's regime, which had strict rules about holiday decorations, the new HOA encouraged creativity. Every house was different. Some went full Clark Griswold with elaborate displays. Others kept it simple with just a wreath on the door. It was beautiful in its diversity. At home, Monica and the girls were waiting. They had driven up for Christmas week. The house smelled like cookies and pine. A fire crackled in the fireplace. Presents wrapped in bright paper filled the space under the tree. Uncle Kevin, Emma and Olivia tackled me with hugs as soon as I walked in. "Did you move all the snow in the whole world?" Olivia asked. "Just in Pinewood Springs," I replied, laughing. "We spent Christmas Eve playing games, watching movies, and eating too many cookies." The girls begged for tractor stories, and I told them about Grandpa's adventures over the years. About the time he pulled a neighbor's truck out of a ditch in a blizzard. About how he once used the tractor to move a shed for the local school. About his legendary kindness and generosity. "I wish I could have met him," Emma said sadly. "Me too," I agreed. "But you know what? Every time we use that tractor to help someone, we're keeping his memory alive. He's still here with us." On Christmas morning, after the girls had torn through their presents, I took them out to the barn. The old John Deere was decorated with a big red bow. "This," I said, "is our family legacy. Someday this will be yours to care for and use. But for now, I want to teach you what it means." I fired up the tractor, and we took a slow drive around the property. The girls took turns sitting on my lap, hands on the wheel. We drove past the pine trees Grandpa had planted in the 80s. Past the pond he had dug by hand. Past the garden where he had grown vegetables for 40 years. Taking care of land isn't just about machines, I explained as we drove. It's about respecting nature, helping your community, and leaving things better than you found them. That's what Grandpa believed, and that's what we're going to keep doing. "Forever?" Emma asked. "Forever," I confirmed. As we circled back to the barn, Monica stood watching from the porch, tears streaming down her face. She gave me a thumbs up, and I knew she understood. This was more than just property. This was legacy. This was family. This was everything Grandpa had worked for. The new year brought new challenges and opportunities. The HOA board asked if I would consider joining as an advisor, helping shape policy around community assistance programs. I agreed to a limited role, making it clear I had no interest in board politics, but would help with practical matters. In February, a massive windstorm knocked down trees throughout the neighborhood, blocking roads and damaging homes. Murphy's Land Services mobilized immediately. We spent a week clearing debris, making emergency repairs, and helping people deal with insurance claims. The HOA provided financial support for equipment and supplies. The community came together in a way that would have been impossible 2 years earlier. By March, as I sat down to do my taxes and review the year, I realized something profound. I had spent more money on equipment and supplies than I had earned from my remote software job. The estate funds were nearly depleted, but I had never been happier. Money wasn't the point. The point was purpose. The point was community. The point was honoring my grandfather's legacy in a meaningful way. I made a decision. I would scale back my software work to part-time and focus more energy on Murphy's Land Services. Maybe eventually we could become a non-profit with proper funding and structure. Maybe we could expand to help other communities. The possibilities were endless. In April, I met a woman named Margaret Reynolds at a community cleanup event. She was new to the neighborhood, a teacher at the local elementary school with a warm smile and sharp sense of humor. We hit it off immediately, bonding over stories of HOA absurdity and shared values about community service. Margaret, who went by Maggie, started volunteering with Murphy's Land Services on weekends. She was great with logistics and people management, turning our somewhat chaotic operation into something more professional and efficient. She also made me laugh more than I had in years. By summer, we were dating. By fall, she had moved into the house with me. Grandpa's house became our house, and it felt right. The property felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Grandpa passed. On the 2-year anniversary of the tractor incident, November 21st, the HOA organized a community recognition event. They gave me a plaque that read, "To Kevin O'Brien, for exemplary community service and leadership. In gratitude from Pinewood Springs." It was nice, but the real gift came later that evening. Over 50 neighbors showed up at my house unannounced with food, drinks, and gifts. It was a surprise party celebrating everything Murphy's Land Services had accomplished. "You changed everything," Dorothy said, raising a glass. 2 years ago, we were living in fear. Today, we're living in community. "Thank you, Kevin." Everyone cheered and toasted. I felt overwhelmed with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this alone," I managed to say. "This community did the hard work. You all stood up. You all voted for change. You all supported each other. I just drove the tractor." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "And what a tractor it is!" Someone shouted later as the party wound down and people headed home. Maggie and I stood on the porch watching the last guests leave. The November night was cold but clear, with stars brilliant overhead. "Your grandfather would be proud," Maggie said, leaning against me. "I hope so," I replied. "I think about him every day, about whether I'm doing right by this place." "You are," she assured me. "You took something broken and fixed it. That's not easy." "Neither is living with me," I joked. "True," she agreed with a grin. "But you come with 5 acres and 2 tractors. That's a pretty good deal." We laughed together, and in that moment I felt completely at peace. The fight with the HOA seemed like ancient history now. Patricia was gone. The corrupt board was gone. The oppressive bylaws were gone. In their place was a genuine community built on mutual respect and care. The old John Deere sat in the barn, a monument to persistence and principle. The new tractor stood ready for whatever challenges came next. And I stood on land that had been in my family for generations, finally understanding what my grandfather had tried to teach me all along. Community isn't about rules. It's about people. It's about showing up when someone needs help. It's about fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about building something bigger than yourself. A snowflake landed on my nose the first of the season. More followed, drifting down in the glow of the porch light. Winter was coming again, and Murphy's Land Services would be ready. We always were. Maggie squeezed my hand. "Come on, let's go inside. It's cold." "Just one more minute," I said. "I want to see the first snow on the land." We stood together watching white flakes transform the landscape, covering everything in a fresh layer of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new neighbors to help, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, I just wanted to stand on this land my grandfather had loved and feel grateful for everything that had brought me here. The tractor saga had been the catalyst, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of community, the beginning of purpose, the beginning of home, and that, I realized, was exactly what Grandpa had wanted all along.